All right, let's dive right into the incredibly unique, character-driven world of Julian Thorne. What we're looking at today is a sci-fi explainer that seamlessly blends deeply personal, philosophical musings with some seriously futuristic technology. It's a journey that takes us from a quirky basement existence all the way to a high-tech dystopia in the year 2066. At its core, this is a story about a guy who just flat out refuses to play by society's rules and the bizarre, hilarious, and ultimately profound places that mindset takes him. To really get Julian's anti-establishment worldview, you just have to look at his take on job interviews. While prepping for what most of us would consider a standard corporate interview, Julian finds himself wishing the employer would just drop all the fake corporate pleasantries and ask him, quote, "Why the fuck do you want to cut meat in the Arctic the rest of your life?" He absolutely craves radical honesty. He's living in a 9-to-5 society obsessed with conformity and pretending everything is fine, and he just hates it. This absolute rejection of the status quo, that is the foundation of his entire character. So where does a story like this actually begin? Well, it starts with a basement and a mysterious code. To really wrap our heads around Julian's journey to the future, we have to look at his incredibly contradictory present-day reality. We're dropped right into his sister Sarah's basement. Now, Julian is a man of extremes. On one hand, he's capable of this immense selflessness. He actually secretly donated a kidney to Sarah, and he went to great lengths to hide the procedure from their nephew Leo so he wouldn't disrupt his young family. But on the other hand, he's perfectly willing to use that literal organ donation as leverage. He blackmails Sarah into letting him live in her basement, rent-free, with his cat. He drops out of corporate life completely just to isolate himself and obsess over this mysterious computer code. Things really kick into high gear when his nephew brings him a special marijuana blend. It's ironically named Writer's Block, and it's supposed to help Julian finally finish a long overdue book. Well, instead of curing his writer's block, this specific blend triggers a massive high-dose THC vision. Julian essentially hallucinates the Big Bang and the complete resetting of time. And from this intense experience, he pulls out 7 mysterious 3-digit numbers. He's totally stumped at first, but then he remembers a chance encounter from way back in 1987 at Patricia Lake with an Australian traveler. She claimed she could actually read his aura in rainbow colors. Putting 2 and 2 together, Julian realizes these aren't just random numbers. They correspond to the 7 colors of the rainbow, and they represent the exact frequencies of human emotion. He realizes he can invent a device that literally reads human emotion. So he isolates these 7 specific numerical frequencies. Numbers like 320, 181, and 134. But of course, there's a major roadblock. While his device can read the data from the human body, the emotional data itself is encrypted. To actually make this invention work, he needs an encryption key, an 8th number, or a master password. And what's so funny here is the sheer absurdity of his process. Think about it. He's dealing with potentially world-changing simulation-level emotional encryption. And how does he try to crack it? He's sitting in the basement, totally frustrated, when his cat, Summer 2, lets out a tiny noise. With absolutely nothing left to lose, he literally types the password meow into the console. Obviously, it doesn't work, but it perfectly captures how his brilliant, yet wonderfully lazy and unconventional mind works. After some more, let's call it high-dose experimentation to jog his memory, he fixates on a vision of the hospital where he was born, frantically typing in variations of his birth data. He types his birth year, 1966, but accidentally hits enter before finishing the location. And boom, instantly, the program compiles. The data streams in, perfectly unencrypted. His invention is alive. And by the way, that birth year beautifully sets up the timeline for him being exactly a 100-year-old man when we reach the end of our story. With the code cracked, we move into the next phase of Julian's life, creating a true sanctuary for the unfiltered. Armed with this functional technology, Julian officially creates what he calls the Clarity Sphere. It's this ping-pong ball-sized device that uses programmable LED nanobot paint mapped exactly to those emotional colors. So a 100% opaque reading means an emotion is totally out of control, like an opaque red for uncontrollable rage. But a 0% transparency reading, that means perfect emotional balance. Essentially, it visually broadcasts a person's exact, unfiltered emotional state over a 21-day average. You literally cannot hide your true self. To explain how this nanobot paint communicates, an inventor actually uses this bizarre analogy of 20 people in a falling elevator, where one guy with a phone has to tell everyone else to, quote, shut the fuck up, just so they can coordinate. It's wildly unconventional, but it works. Using the profits from the Clarity Sphere, plus the sales of a satirical autobiography he finally finishes, Julian builds The Sanctuary.
This is a 25-acre high-end retreat deep in the high peaks. And the whole facility is designed to completely remove all worldly excuses for failure. You get soundproofed, pitch-black isolation rooms, free food catering to any diet, zero judgment, and no forced therapies. The only catch? You have to pass a truth test to get in. Julian places a master clarity sphere in an applicant's hand and simply asks why they want to enter. Since the sphere instantly reads their emotional truth, you can only get in if you drop the societal masks and reveal your true, unfiltered reason for being there. It's also during this era that Julian reunites with Elena, a woman he loved decades ago. And beautifully, they find that despite all those years apart, they can still perfectly read each other without even needing the clarity sphere.
Now, amidst all this profound tech and isolation, there is a lot of comedy in the chaos. Before we jump ahead to the dystopian future, we really have to pause and appreciate the dark, wonderfully petty humor that punctuates Julian's life. He's a visionary, for sure, but his rebellion against societal norms manifests in some hilariously spiteful ways. Back in his corporate days, he survived his narcissistic boss, who he actually called the Overlord, by creating bingo cards for staff meetings. The first employee to get a bingo based on the Overlord's dramatic, awful outbursts got free beers. Then there's the Airbnb incident. He stayed at a rental with overly dictatorial rules, like no shoes on the balcony. But he noticed the manual didn't explicitly ban hookers. So, in an act of pure, malicious compliance, he hired 2 contractors specifically to have sex on every single piece of the owner's furniture. Because, hey, there was nothing in the rules against it. He also constantly jokes about his sister Sarah's boundless energy, despite her many surgeries. He claims that even if her foot were amputated, she'd still sprint to the door, bleeding all over her prized mahogany floor. We also see this really dry situational wit early on in his romance with Elena. When they first met back in the day, Elena proudly told him she drove a bright yellow car because red cars are for vain showboats seeking attention. Julian just silently nodded, right before leading her out to his own car, which happened to be the absolute brightest, reddest sports car in the entire parking lot. Even their final breakup morning years ago was perfectly awkward, ending with a hug from his mother-in-law that lasted, as he put it, 2 seconds too long while he tried to keep his eyes from watering. And his utter refusal to expend energy on meaningless social conventions is just brilliant. When it comes to naming pets, Julian is so defiantly uncreative that he simply increments their names like software updates. He doesn't bother with new names. He just rolls out Jello 4, Spooky 4, Summer 3, and Winter 1. It's practical, it's hilarious, and it is just perfectly Julian. But eventually, time catches up with everyone. Which brings us to a silent reflection in the year 2066. Fast forward decades to the year 2066. The world has entirely transformed into a high-tech dystopia. Humanity is bracing for the gravity well, this rogue cosmic event threatening the planet with comets. Society is now hyper-monitored by a massive orbital data bank known as the Square. Citizens live these highly regulated lives with implanted RFID chips tracking their health from birth to death. But Julian? At exactly 100 years old, he stubbornly remains one of the very last unchipped citizens on Earth. He lives in a log house in the woods with Elena, completely rejecting the sterile, artificial medical culture that the rest of humanity has embraced. This future society relies heavily on the tube. It's a massive, pneumatic hypertube system capable of rocketing automated cars across continents in mere minutes. It represents the absolute pinnacle of sterilized convenience, instantly connecting everyone to massive, highly advanced mega hospitals. Which brings us to the emotional climax of the story. Julian's health is finally failing. He calls for their automated car, and Elena immediately prepares to route them through the cube to the Calgary Mega Hospital, where advanced tech could easily save him. But Julian overrides the command. He absolutely refuses the tube. Instead, he requests the car take them to the Great Divide Lodge. He chooses to bypass the hypertube entirely, forcing the car to take a slow drive down the crumbling, abandoned, analog remains of the Trans-Canada Highway. But he doesn't actually go to the lodge. He asks Elena to take him to Mirror Pond one last time. They sit on a wooden bench she carved years ago, the exact spot where they had connected so deeply decades prior. As they sit there, watching a single beaver, a Castor canadensis, glide silently through the water just as it did in the past, Julian finally finds it. The ultimate perfect emotional clarity and transparency that he spent his entire life and his inventions trying to achieve. And with that, he closes his eyes for the last time. It's an incredibly beautiful, quiet end to a very loud, rebellious life. And it leaves us with a profound question about the direction of our own society. As we race toward optimization and technology, what exactly are we leaving behind? What you should really take away from this is the enduring power of authentic, unfiltered human connection. So, I'll leave you with this. If your end was near, would you choose the sterilized, chipped convenience of the future or the vulnerable, analog clarity of the past? Something to think about.